You said your husband didn't have any symptoms unless you look at it from a different lens. What did you mean by a different lens?
Other factors at play, and we can certainly be shifting outcomes by looking at a different set of factors.
Only recently I realized how common chronic fatigue syndrome is.
We often write off as, whoops, that weird thing happened.
Don't call out my nerdiness like that. All 8 billion of us are doing metabolism at all times. This show is about learning what metabolism is, how it affects you in every way possible, from mood and mental state to performance and energy. We are all about fine-tuning the human experience for you to achieve the best self you can be. And if you are someone who loves science, curious to know how your body works and how to optimize it, then you are in the right place. This is the H.V.M.N. podcast. In this episode, we have Andrea Nakayama, who is the host of 15-Minute Matrix podcast and the founder of Functional Nutrition Alliance. Andrea is leading thousands of students and practitioners around the globe in a revolution to offer better health solutions to the growing chronic illness epidemic. By highlighting the importance of systems biology, root cause methodology, and therapeutic partnerships, she helps historically underserved individuals reclaim ownership of their own health. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. We also talk about different terminologies, breaking down the science around functional medicine. Stay tuned and enjoy this episode. Hi, Andrea. Thank you very much for coming on to Health via Modern Nutrition podcast. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Latt. I'm so excited to be here with you.
Yeah, I am very excited to discuss your story. You have a very interesting backstory and your passion, and I'm so excited. So without further ado, let's talk about your background. Where did you come from? How did you end up here? Where did you get your training from?
Yeah, long story. So I'll make that long story short.
No, make it long. People love stories.
I love stories too. So like many of us, my introduction into the realm of healthcare started with a family health crisis. Usually it's our own or a family member's health crisis. And this was back in April of 2000 when I was living in San Francisco, which we were just talking about. And I was 7 weeks pregnant. And my husband, my late husband, Isamu, was all of a sudden diagnosed with a brain tumor, a very aggressive brain tumor called a glioblastoma multiforme. So he was diagnosed out of the blue. It didn't seem like there were any leading signs or symptoms unless we looked back through a different lens. And that really catapulted us into a different relationship with medicine. Period. We had really never been in the medical system at that point in our lives. It was in our early 30s, and also woke me up to some of the places where there were gaps in the system and where I could turn to some other forms of integrative or alternative or whatever we want to call the augmented work that we do to support medical intervention. So that's when I started reading a lot about nutrition. I already was interested in food and in my own nutrition, but I started looking at nutrition in relation to cancer and looking at sugar and how sugar, refined sugar in the system or elevated blood sugar can impact tumor or cancer growth, and showing that research to Isamu and helping to make decisions together. We were making decisions which medical protocols, which dietary and lifestyle recommendations. So I think of that time as my boot camp, but it was several years after he passed away. He lived 2.5 years after a 6-month prognosis. It was after that I realized this was my passion. And I put myself back through school, years and years of school, because I was coming from a very different career background. And
what were you doing before?
I worked in book publishing. So I was a production director, which is pretty evident in my work now. But I worked in book publishing for 15 years for a company in San Francisco and in New York. And I realized what was missing in my nutrition education. Either I was learning dietary theory and it was missing that body systems focus, or I was learning biochemistry and it was missing the clinical intervention. So I started to practice differently and ultimately create what I thought would be a mentorship about 11 years ago for some other coaches and clinicians, and ended up being an entire business where I train thousands of practitioners around the globe in the science and art of functional nutrition, which I'm sure we'll talk about further. But that's the story of how I got here. I was a single mom, put myself back through school, built an entire business. That son that I was pregnant with is now 22 years old, graduated college, living in New York. So it's a long journey, like I said, but it really started with that particular incident with my husband's diagnosis.
And you mentioned something that caught my attention earlier. You said, you know, your husband didn't have any symptoms unless you look at it from a different lens. What did you mean by a different lens? And could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, and I'm sorry if you hear a kitty cat in the background. It might sound like a baby. I don't have a baby in the house.
No,
Maybe
I
you
don't
don't
hear
hear it.
anything.
Okay,
No, I don't.
good. So, really, in his situation, it was pretty minor things related to neurological function, like proprioception, himself in space, maybe a little bit of dizziness. So, oftentimes with chronic illnesses like autoimmunity or Lyme disease, we can look at some more severe signs and symptoms that might happen for quite some time. In this instance, there were really just little things where, like, maybe he hit a pole backing out of a parking spot and came out going like, that's weird. But in retrospect, we think, was he missing some peripheral vision in that moment? So it was really things like that that I think in our youth, we often write off as, whoops, that weird thing happened. But in chronic illness, we also suppress in our hopes of kind of making something okay or attributing it to fatigue from work or a move or whatever it might be.
You know, it's interesting you mentioned fatigue because only recently I realized how common chronic fatigue syndrome is, and that many people are going through that, and it's an official diagnosis that people ought to take note of and essentially address, because otherwise over time you are overtaxing your mitochondria and overworking yourself, and hence other symptoms then show up.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that one of the things that we really need to come back to, and this is where I look at things through a functional lens, is we may be anchoring on the diagnosis and not recognizing what might be at root in our signs and symptoms or our diagnoses. And one of the things I can recognize is even something like hydration, which seems very simple, can impact our red blood cell function, that can impact our iron levels, that can impact our fatigue. And we're looking for some fix or some resolution
Now I
based
want
on
to
the
drink water.
diagnosis. Yeah, me too. We'll have some water. But really just coming back to kind of what I like to think of as, or what's thought of in systems thinking as first principles thinking. How do we come back to that deeper understanding of the groundwork that we need in order to address all the signs, symptoms, and diagnoses we may experience?
Okay, great. This is a great segue to my next question, which is functional medicine or functional healthcare, functional integrative medicine. I've interviewed quite a few functional doctors, functional medicine doctors on this podcast before, and all of them sort of point towards the same direction. And this is what I understand, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that what you guys do is essentially take all these different areas and feedback into consideration, but really figure out what the root cause is and then address the root cause. Is that a correct understanding of functional medicine?
True but partial. So I'm going to reframe it because
Yes,
I think
please.
functional medicine has lost its way, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what should be functional, or what it traditionally was, and the difference between functional medicine and functional nutrition. So functional medicine, like integrative medicine, was really born in the 1990s. People often want to know what's the difference between holistic and integrative and functional. So holistic's just a big umbrella term. Integrative means we acknowledge different types of therapies. So yes, you may be going to the oncologist or the rheumatologist, and you're also thinking about your nutrition and your acupuncture and your stress reduction. So you're integrating different approaches. A functional approach was designed to really honor three primary tenets. Those three tenets are the therapeutic partnership, looking for the root causes, and I'm going to put an S on that root cause, and a systems-based approach. So that therapeutic partnership really acknowledges that the patient brings an expertise to the room, and we want to understand their story. As you said at the beginning of our time together, we love stories. The story is a really important part of how we work with that person, and we don't ignore that story. And there's a scientific way to look at it, as well as an empathetic way to look at it. So the therapeutic partnership is one tenet. Looking for the roots is understanding why is this happening, not just what do I do about it. So our current medical system, which we need and which does really important intervention, looks at protocols. What do we do based on XYZ? We're saying, why is XYZ happening? Why is that? What's going on upstream? And I have a system that helps us to think about that. And then a systems-based approach is acknowledging systems biology. So instead of thinking in the realm of ologies, like your endocrinology, your rheumatology, your gastroenterology, your psychology, we're saying, wait a minute, everything's connected. It's a full body systems. The gut's connected to the brain. The hormones are connected to the liver, which is connected to the gut. It's all connected. We can't look at your structure without looking at your inflammation, which is affecting your immune system. Everything's connected. So my mantra based on that is everything's connected. We are all unique and all things matter. And that embraces the realm of omics, precision medicine practices, and epigenetics. So it's related to fields of science that are informing how we then behave in practice. And then the difference between functional medicine, that different? Okay, I'll stop there.
No. I was going to ask more clarification question, but if you have any more to add to that, please finish your thought.
Yeah, I was just going to say the difference between functional medicine and functional nutrition are the tools in our toolbox. So functional medicine doctors usually recognize the importance of dietary and lifestyle modifications. They may not know how to deliver dietary and lifestyle modifications. Dietary modifications are not a handout. They often take a real deep dive into a person's cultural background, their relationship to their body and to food restriction, and really understanding who is this person and what's the right evolution of change for them. So it's not behavior change like health coaching might be, but it is recognizing the truth of the individual in our recommendations at a more minute level of implementation into the everyday than often a functional medicine practitioner has time for.
So functional nutrition falls under that sort of part of
Yes,
functional.
exactly.
Yeah, right.
Yes,
So it's
all
a tool.
dietary
Yeah.
and lifestyle modification. Yes.
Yeah, I love it, and I would love to reaffirm what you just said about how everything is interconnected. The whole body is a huge system that talks to each other. One thing goes wrong, other things may overcompensate and go wrong as well. I talk about that all the time. Metabolism is more complicated than a straight line, a straight equation. And the second thing is that you mentioned we are all unique. So everyone is the same in the sense that everything within our bodies are interconnected, but everyone is unique, and therefore we need personalized medicine. And here we go. Now we need more clarification and definition for our audience. You mentioned the three things: omics, precision medicine, epigenetics. Can you please elaborate on what those three terms are?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, like it comes down to everything is connected. We are all unique and all things matter. So omics helps us to understand that interconnection, that everything is connected. We can think about genomics, proteomics, food omics. There's all sorts of omics that are being studied, and the omics recognize those interconnections, how one thing influences another. If we think of it like a solar system, you can't move one star or planet without it impacting everything. And that's what's happening within us. People often want to jump to, like, I just want to understand hormones or Alzheimer's or whatever it is, without really understanding that there's other factors at play, and we can certainly be shifting outcomes by looking at a different set of factors rather than just that target practice at that level of the diagnosis or the signs and symptoms. So that's omics. Everything is connected. We are all oh, go ahead.
To that, and to add to that as well, I did some metabolomics work when I did my PhD around diabetes and cardiovascular disease. And metabolomics is essentially scanning through the entire cell and looking at what metabolites, or what metabolites, what intermediates go up and go down, how they are affected to each other, in relation to each other, as well as between different disease states. So that's just to be clear, that's the relationship. That's why Andrea was talking about the relationship between different things. It's between molecules, between systems, and between these different organs. Sorry, go ahead.
Beautiful example. No, I love that example. I'm so glad you brought that up and you have that personal experience looking at that to be able to articulate it. So if we go over from everything is connected to we are all unique, that's where we're looking at in functional medicine what are called the ATMs. ATMs stand for the antecedents, the triggers, and the mediators. And we're all going to be different in our antecedents, triggers, and mediators. We may come from different heritage, cultural, may have experienced different triggers throughout our lives, whether that's due, like me, to the death of my spouse and being a single mother, whether it's due to having food poisoning or a certain virus, moving to another country. All of those can be thought of as the things that add up throughout our lives. And then our mediators are the things that help us feel better or make us feel worse. Again, they're going to be different for each and every one of us, even if we have the same diagnosis. So an example of where precision practices are used most these days are in cancer and also in mental health pharmacology. That's where we're actually looking at who is this, or what is the makeup of, in cancer, the cell, and how do we treat that versus the diagnosis itself. So we used to think that a breast cancer was treated because the same way because it was in the breast. And now we know that we're looking at the makeup of that tumor to understand the best intervention possible. That's what precision practice is. I'm just borrowing from that term to say we are all unique. I recognize that you are not your diagnosis. Just because I have Hashimoto's and someone else has Hashimoto's doesn't mean we're going to respond to the same therapies or recommendations, because we just got to a tipping point, to use Malcolm Gladwell's terminology, that got the same name, but the things that led us to that tipping point are likely very different. So that's the precision piece of the
Yep.
equation.
And I want to add to that as well. So as opposed to precision medicine, we can look at another example of the shotgun method, where we look at using a broad spectrum antibiotics to treat one specific infection, and we kill off everything within the vicinity. And that used to work, but as we learn further and further that we may be causing additional damage unnecessarily, that may lead to further downstream effect and also create more complications down the road. So hence why precision medicine is important to really focus on. But of course, the caveat is that we have to really understand, one, the mechanism of action of the disease and manifestation and the progression, and two, how to actually target it specifically. Because as easy as it sounds when we talk about it, in the lab, in the clinics, in the hospitals, in the healthcare providers space, it is very difficult to pinpoint that small receptor to block, that small molecule to activate, you know. So that's the caveat there, just to add on to that.
Yeah, and I'm thinking of it a little bit more broadly. So if I go back to that breast cancer example, two people can have a breast cancer in the same breast, be the same age, be the same weight, so many similarities. I'm not going to be able to do the work as a functional nutritionist to go in and determine the makeup of their cells. But I can look at a broader set of labs and determine for each individual, is their cancer inflammatory in nature, or is inflammation contributing? Is it hormonal in nature? And I can work with a number of different practices that still allow me, as a functional nutrition counselor, within my scope of practice, to be able to shift and personalize my recommendations based on their unique situation instead of treating them both the same because of their diagnosis. So I think there's different levels of where we can carry personalization into clinical care that are reliant on that deep research that may be costly and out of scope, but also saying, wait a minute, if that's true, then what can I do to embrace that same philosophy?
And I want to point out this is the main difference between the basic scientist and the clinician. You see how microscopic I look into, you know, more of the molecules and the pathways, and then you're like, you know what? These are people. Let's look at a bigger picture. We can personalize to a certain extent if we look at more parameters and all of that. And we're going to talk about like what is more parameters and is more the better sort of area of research. But before we go there, I think there is something that is very relatable to our audience here at H.V.M.N podcast. A lot of our audience are biohackers, are people trying to be healthy, who may not have that scientific or medical background to do the research that they need to do in order to better their health or optimize their health. And in which case, your background is super interesting and relatable here because you went from book publishing to where you are now. So tell us more, give us some advice, top 3 things that you use or you have found as you were doing your research to get you the right information and make you an expert enough to understand the information and implement it.
Yeah, I think it is. Thank you for that question. And I think it is a combination of understanding the human behind the science. So, a lot of times, I think when we're biohacking, some of the challenges we experience is we're looking for information, but we don't understand the context of that information. I am a contextualist. I want to understand the context of the human body, of everything interacting, of recognizing your trauma and who you are coming into a situation. And a lot of times I think that science, or what's fed to us in media, is bypassing a lot of the nuances that come from that. So I like to think of the principles that I've created as the simplicity on the other side of complexity. So that means I understand the body systems in order to talk about hydration. I'm not just saying, hey, we all need to hydrate, drink this much water per day. I'm saying hydration is actually going to impact these physiological functions in your body. Let's give it a try. And oftentimes we think that's too simple. So I have a lot of systems that I've developed that help people to think through healthcare in a different way. And one of those is what I call the 3 tiers to epigenetic mastery, or the 3 tiers to nutrition mastery. And that's tier 1, the non-negotiables, tier 2, deficiency to sufficiency, and tier 3, dismantling dysfunction. Our impulse is to go right to tier 3. What's wrong with me? How do I fix it? That's our impulse in medicine, but also in biohacking. What's wrong with me? Let me do this test, and then I'm going to target that response. And what I'm saying is we equally target tier 3 when we focus on tier 1 and tier 2. So our non-negotiables are unique to us, but as you said so beautifully, we share some physiologically. What I think of as the non-negotiable trifecta is sleep, poop, and blood sugar balance. If you are not sleeping, you are not pooping, and you do not have balanced blood sugar, all those other things you're trying to target are going to be really difficult to experience the sustainable results that we're after. So tier 1, that's the non-negotiable trifecta, true for all of us. And then within that and beyond that, we're all going to have different non-negotiables. You might want to delve into a scientific paper and it gives you lots of excitement, and I may listen to a crime
Don't call me,
podcast, right?
don't call out my nerdiness like that.
Knowing your non-negotiables is like a recipe for our positive health outcomes. Those deficiencies, that tier 2, that could be a vitamin D or vitamin K deficiency. It could be a hydrochloric acid or an enzyme deficiency. It could also be a deficiency in sleep or in fiber or in love or joy or laughter or nature. Like, I like to think really broadly about, wait a minute, how do I shift out of this I'm broken, let's fix it way of thinking that is so prevalent when it comes to health, and really focus on health, which is the soil that really nourishes those roots, that expresses in those branches and those leaves that we see. So that's, I don't know if that answered your question, but I think of it as a broader lens that actually seems simple, but it's infused with the complexity of what those things actually do physiologically.
And basically, don't wait until something's bad that's showing up and do something about it, and then just focus on that. Don't wait until a problem shows up and then solve the problem, but look at it from a more holistic point of view and get to know your body better. But in terms of like the scientific research, right? Yeah, you went back to school and all of that. Like, I think a lot of us nowadays have so much access to information, scientific publications. What should people be looking out for if they want to learn all of this? Like, if they want to take what you just said and then they want to go on this journey and learn about whatever that's they think that's going on with their body, whether they want to make it better from just being healthy, or they are having some dysfunction and they want to improve. Where can they start? Where do they start, and what should they focus on?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to bring us back if we're thinking about personal care, because of course I'm like, well, I have a 10-month training program in the science and art of functional nutrition, right? So that is where I want to really teach people the reframe. Like, how do we approach healthcare differently? Because if we're experiencing something where we're sick and not getting better, and we're seeking and seeking and seeking and seeking, and we're stuck in that story, then we are stuck in a sympathetic dominant state, which is a nervous system overdrive, which is not supporting a state of healing. And I speak more to the chronically ill than necessarily the biohacker. Sometimes the biohacker, and you can tell me more about your audience, but sometimes the biohacker is fine and they're just optimizing. Shouldn't say just, but they're optimizing versus really working with
Fixing the
something
problem. Yeah.
that's, yeah. And I see people who have tried everything. They've been everywhere. They're over it. They're spent a lot of money and they need a real reframe. So hopefully nobody's gotten to that place. But if you have, that's where I want to invite you to come back to first principles thinking. First principles thinking is that idea that the baseline principles are going to give us results. So if you're trying to think about your hair loss or your fatigue, or I don't know, what are other symptoms that you see people in your community coming forward with? Tell me what those are and I'll speak into those.
All sorts of anything that's related to metabolic dysfunction. We've seen it all, But the most common ones, obviously, I've got people DMing me about their blood sugar levels, as you said, the fatigue levels, sleep problems. And then there is the other end of the spectrum where they are really fit. They're like, how do I get faster, stronger, and
Right.
healthier, And so I always say health is a spectrum, and we're all on the same spectrum. And whether you are an athlete or you are somebody who is struggling with your weight, it's still the same method, maybe not to the same
Yes.
degree, but it's the same approach on how to optimize health and optimize your body, because human metabolism works in a similar way.
Yes. Yeah. So I'm going to bring this back to your question that you just asked me, like, what are the things, and also the area of science we haven't yet spoken about, which is epigenetics. So
Yes.
I really do think of functional nutrition counselors as epigenetic masters. We are focusing on what I'm going to call the terrain. So if we imagine a tree in the middle of a field, and that tree is gorgeous, and we're so drawn to that tree, and we're walking towards it, and as we get closer we recognize that that tree has some leaves that are turning, and we'll pretend it's not fall, it's spring. It has some branches that don't look really healthy, and we are really compelled to support that tree to thrive because it's so beautiful and majestic. And we can consider, wait a minute, should I get a ladder and pick off the leaves? Well, that's not going to help anything. Should I get a ladder and a saw and saw off the branches? No, that's not going to really help this tree survive. Where do I need to go? Should I go down to the trunk? Wait, I should go deeper. Maybe I should think about the roots. But wait a minute, where do those roots live?
I get to interview all these doctors, scientists, and cool people in this health and fitness industry, all made possible because of this podcast that is funded by the company I work for, which is Health via Modern Nutrition, or H.V.M.N. And it is not that they pay me to do this, but I genuinely love and believe in the product Ketone-IQ. I use it every day before my podcast, before my workout, or even after my workout for recovery. There hasn't been a single supplement that can give me such a drastic change in subjective feel within minutes as much as Ketone-IQ has. For those of you who do not know me, I'm from Malaysia, I got my PhD from the UK, and my passion is in science and chronic diseases. And I believe it is all about transparency, scientific integrity, and about sharing with everyone so that everyone can benefit from it. And if you like this content and our work, please do support us by liking, leaving a review, or sharing with your friends and families, or even buying a shot of Ketone-IQ at any Sprouts nationwide in the US, and the first shot is on us. Just scan the QR code and you'll get your money back for your first shot. You can also use the code HVMNPOD20, that is HVMNPOD20, and get 20% off your first purchase at the HVMN website.
Those roots live in the soil, in the terrain. And there's a model that I've developed called 3 roots, many branches. Any sign, symptom, or diagnosis that we have, whether it's the fatigue, the headaches, the hair loss, the blood sugar imbalances, those are branches. Hashimoto's, cancer, diabetes, anything, those are branches on our tree. If we come down to the roots of any chronic health condition, they are always related to our genes, our digestion, and our inflammation. Always. All 3 roots, any chronic sign, symptom, or diagnosis. However, I can't target your genes, but I can influence the environment in which your genes live. That's our epigenetics. So I think of that as our circle of influence. And that influence, those influencing factors are including our food, our movement, our environment, and our mindset. And each of those roots, the genes, digestion, and inflammation, each have their own circle of influence, which is like the soil. So are we eating in the way that supports our body best? And where are we getting that information? That's the food category. We might have to think about quality, quantity, diversity, timing. Those are all things. As an example, people will think, oh, intermittent fasting, it's the latest thing. or ketogenic diet, that's what I should be doing for XYZ. We don't know if that's, like you said about broad spectrum antibiotics, doing damage to the body as opposed to supporting the body. Research shows us one thing in a controlled environment, but that may not be right for you. If somebody has blood sugar issues that are swinging up and down and they're trying to go longer periods of time without eating, that's a process. It's not an overnight thing because the body needs to adjust. So I'm thinking about it as how do we nourish the soil? And we can't think about food or nutrition without thinking about digestion. You could be eating the best diet ever according to whatever expert you want to follow. But if your system isn't able to break down and receive the nutrients that you're eating, we got a problem. So it's not just about the external factor or the external dogma. It's about how that interacts with your particular body. It's that symbiosis.
So, how do you determine the capabilities of the digestive system in this case? Because most people will understand if I do certain diet, I react well, then it's fine. Is there a particular way in which you use to determine what classification or categorization of people's digestion is?
Yeah, so for me, clinically, I'm using deep assessment and motivational interviewing. I don't move to testing unless I don't have enough information to already move things in the right direction. And this is also different in what a lot of functional medicine practitioners do. They anchor on the test. Also, a lot of biohackers anchor on testing before we might actually go into intervention. So I use testing. I love testing. I start with regular old serum testing, but I want testing when I need more information. So I'm really basing it on what does that person tell me. If they start to say, every time I eat meat, I feel like I'm gonna have a heart attack, or I notice that my poop is regular on some days and not regular on others, I'm gonna start doing what I call a food mood poop journal. If that person feels comfortable tracking their food, not everybody does for various reasons, then I'm going to start to see how do we put together what somebody can be in touch with in their life that doesn't exist outside of them, that actually exists in their own lived experience, to give me more information, to make recommendations to see what shifts. So it's a journey with their body as opposed to, oh, I did this stool analysis that tells me you're depleted in this bacteria. I already know you're depleted in bacteria if you're coming to me. Like, already know there's not enough diversification there. I do not need to do an expensive test to help me support your gut permeability or hyperpermeability. So I'm looking at the individual and using that time of assessment to understand how do we make incremental recommendations. And Latt, they are never a diet. It's always going to be incremental in a pace that that person can manage in perpetuity, unless we're doing a therapeutic plan for a very specific reason that we know is 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 1 month, and we're holding that tightly. Otherwise, I don't want to put people on a diet. I want them to live their lives and feel better.
I love it because just recently I made a piece of content on my Instagram when people asked me what's the best diet. And I said, I generally don't agree cutting out or omitting an entire food group if it's not for a specific therapeutic reason. If if you're having epilepsy, you're going through keto diet and it really helps you. And if you go on a normal diet and you relapse, then by all means, like, please keep on doing the keto diet because it is for a specific therapeutic reason. But if you're doing it for health, I think a balanced whole foods diet, granted in different proportions based on your own individuality and uniqueness, would be very important. But other than that, I don't believe there is a specific diet that trumps others. It's, our bodies are designed to be able to metabolize all these different macro and micronutrients already. So it depends on what your body is already lacking based on your previous habits and lifestyle, and then adjust from that.
1,000% agree. And I think it's very individual. And this is where a lot of the dietary theories can become really dangerous, because removing large food groups means we're going to become nutrient deficient in certain nutrients. And so there's a catch-22 there, where people are eating a certain way and they're not getting other nutrients. At a gross level, we can think of somebody eating a ketogenic diet and wonder where they're getting their fiber, unless you're Dr. Terry Walsh, who is, I know you've spoken to, who's
Yes.
very, conscious about getting her fiber. Not a lot of people are Dr. Terry Walsh. Like, I love Terry, and she's so careful
I
about
love
her
Terry.
8 cups, right? So not many people are thinking like that. And she's had to recognize that as she does her scientific work, because she has a certain way of being able to implement dietary intervention that was very hard for the people in her study. And so recognizing that we're not all Terry Walsh, we're not all counting our 8 cups of vegetables a day. So if we're eating in a certain way, what are we eliminating? If we're not eating grains, are we getting our B vitamins? Because our brains, our hormone, everything needs those vitamins. So really understanding that these dietary theories can result in adverse effects if they're done too long and they're too limited. And in our clinic at the Functional Nutrition Alliance, we see people who come in eating 3 foods because they've eliminated and eliminated and eliminated because of what they think are symptoms, and they're not doing the internal healing to be able to receive those foods and nutrients. Like you said, we're all meant to be able to handle our oxalates and our lectins. Our bodies are designed to be able to deal with those things. And if they can't deal with them, it's not just an outside job, it's an inside job. And that requires somebody who can really think through that dual and symbiotic lens.
So give us some example when you talk about internal healing. What do you mean by that? How do you do that?
Yeah, again, it's going to come back to those 3 roots. So the genes, digestion, and inflammation.
So
I want to
really
make
the
sure
change of
digestion is
lifestyle.
optimized. Yes, exactly. And optimized digestion means we're chewing our food, we're slowing down, we've got the chemicals that we need to break down our food. So I think about the circle of influence around digestion as mechanical, chemical, structural, and microbial. Oftentimes we want to jump to the microbial, but guess what? Exercise feeds your microbiome, sleep feeds your microbiome, apples feed your microbiome, resistant starches feed your microbiome. We think that we're just going to take probiotics and take that particular probiotic.
Yeah, gut health is the trend, right? It's the trendy term, and people jump onto that.
Yeah, yeah, and we think that it's just that one thing, our microbiome, but it's really vast. And the digestive system is where your food meets your physiology, feeds your cells, and all the things that happen from there. And so we want to make sure that that is optimized. And usually there are clues based on what somebody tells you in a clinical setting that help you figure out, like a detective, wait, where do we need to do some optimization? And does that result in feeling better? What do you feel that's different? Are you pooping better? Do you have more energy? All of those things. And inflammation, as you know, is just huge. And so the circle of influence that I think of for inflammation is to clear, calm, enhance, and modulate. And we may need to clear an infection. We may need to clear a toxic relationship. We may need to clear something in your household that is bothering you. We may need to clear some idea that you're broken. We may need to clear all sorts of things that we're thinking through, again, broadly, in order to calm the system, which includes calming the nervous system, not being in that sympathetic dominant state. So I'm giving you lots of answers that aren't direct, because we're not playing target practice. We're looking at, wait a minute, this is an individual, you are an individual, and this means that I look at you not as a broken person with fatigue or Hashimoto's or MS or cancer. You are a person who has those things. Why? How do I look more broadly, deeper and broader in order to help? Somebody else is doing the target practice. Great. Awesome. This isn't either or, it's a yes and.
Yeah, and we spend 24 hours a day doing multiple things, and hence those multiple things would affect us naturally. So whatever you've explained, it really resonated with me. It really makes sense. It's almost like common sense, right? And I think a lot of people who are listening or watching would also agree that, okay, that sounds rational, that sounds logical, right? You figure out what's wrong with you. We figure out how are you feeling in relation to what you ate, in relation to your environment, in relation to what you do throughout the day, whether you sleep, poop, or have a relationship. But why, if it's so simple, why are we in the US facing such an increase in chronic diseases and an increase in mental health? What seems to be the problem here?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm going to say everything is connected. We're all unique and all things matter. Lunch matters, sleep matters, hydration matters, right? Relationships matter. And really, it is the simplicity on the other side of complexity. I believe we've made our healthcare too complicated. We've given it away. We actually, when it comes to so many aspects, in our lives, we really love individuality. So these days, you can get your blue jeans in different half sizes, your bra meant to fit your particular shape. We have Spotify accounts, sleep numbers that give us the right softness in our bed. But when it comes to healthcare, we give it all away to either other providers or other influencers without understanding the uniqueness of our situation. So for me, there's a real paradox in how much individuality we are claiming in certain aspects of our lives, but how little individuality we're owning when it comes to our health and our health care. When you say, this works for me, that doesn't work for me. I recently was talking to a dear friend of mine who also happens to be the publisher of my upcoming book. She has an autoimmune condition, and she called me in tears because she was trying to do a therapeutic diet plan and it was too restrictive for her. She was losing weight too rapidly. She was in tears, just crying because she was so depleted she couldn't even take care of her child. And that's what we're looking to. Oh, I feel this, I should do that diet. I should do that plan. But that's not based on that person, that human who's saying, you know what? I love when my husband cooks me dinner and this is too restrictive for him. So I'm not getting my meals prepared for me. How do I find my way with the yes and? Yes, something's going on that I need to resolve. And I love when my husband cooks me dinner and he's a darn good cook, and it's great when I come home from a long day of work. How do we make both of that true as opposed to just subscribing to something that we think is going to give us answers? So I think culturally, we are so accustomed to a quick fix that we're adopting all these different theories that we think will get us there that aren't necessarily the right road for us. Meanwhile, there's a lot of different things that are leading to a lot of underlying conditions that do take root in our genes, our digestion, and our inflammation. We're exposed to more, we have more stress. All of these things are contributing to a state, an internal state that's more susceptible to all the signs, symptoms, and diagnoses we're experiencing today.
That's very well explained. Thank you so much. Because I always tell people that science is very important and it is at the forefront of us understanding a disease, understanding how to solve it. But always remember when you read a scientific paper or a study, always look at the methods and demographics and really relate to that population and think for yourself, how important and unique you are. And if that population does not relate to you 100%, do not follow 100%. Like that result may not superimpose 100% onto you. Take what you need from that piece of data and science, implement part of it or implement all of it and see how you feel. And if you can't replicate the result, that means there's something that is not translating onto you. And I think that is super important for people to understand. And I love it when nowadays everyone is an expert on social media, right? And they'll have argument on social media, and one would quote one paper saying this diet is bad, and then the other one is like, no, actually this other study says that this diet is good, and they're in completely different populations, completely different age groups, looking at completely different endpoints, but it's just like cherry picking one sentence saying that it's bad or it's good. And it's ridiculous. And I jump in there and I point it out, and they're like, oh, okay. It's so with regards to the uniqueness, and before we go on to the last section of the question, do you have anything to add there?
No, I think we covered a lot of bases. It's fun
Okay.
to talk about
Okay.
this stuff.
Yeah, no, of course. And when it comes to uniqueness, and I know this next section of questions would appear to be ironic because I am going to give you certain types of conditions that most people would ask me for solutions, right? I'm not asking you for the solution because I know the solution is unique to each individual. What I'm going to give you is like, okay, I give you a condition and you tell me what these individuals should look out for, should do before they go to a healthcare provider like yourself to really pinpoint, where they reach that point. Because a lot of these people, they're not severe. They are at very early stages of like recognizing maybe their blood sugar is a bit high, or recognizing that they are not pooping regularly, or even like, feeling a bit fatigued on certain days. So they don't necessarily have the justification to like, I need to go to the doctor. But what should they be looking out for, and what should they do, right? So you ready for that?
Yes, love it.
Okay.
They may all be the same answers, but we'll see.
Okay. The first one is very, very popular, blood sugar irregulation.
Yes. Yeah. Blood sugar regulation is at the base of a lot of how I look at any hormonal issue. So the first thing I'm going to tell people who are suspecting blood sugar irregularities, or they've tested and they see irregularities, is to make sure you're eating fat, fiber, and protein at every single meal. Every single time you eat fat, fiber, and protein, and start to track, if you are measuring in one way or another, what happens that's different. If you're not measuring with a CGM, a continuous glucose monitor, or with other methods of testing your blood sugar, then just see how you feel. Do you feel more energy? Do you sleep better? Can you last longer between meals? So fat, fiber, and protein. And of course, those are going to be particular to you in terms of quantities and what works for you. And fiber is something that we have to start low and go slow. Somebody can't like just add a whole bunch of fiber and have great results. So just tune into your body and see what it does for you. Does it back you up, or does it help you go? So for me, blood sugar, fat, fiber, protein, number one.
Thank you. Great answer. Second condition, fatigue and tiredness. What should they look out for? What should they do?
Again, I'm going to say fat, fiber, protein is going to be really, really critical, but also look at your sleep patterns. Is sleep affecting you? I said hydration earlier, so I'm going to put a pin in that. But for your sleep, it's not just, are you getting enough hours? Ask yourself deeper questions. I want to go deeper than that. What time are you going to sleep? Is that a regular time? How are you falling asleep? Are you feeling rested when you wake up? Do you wake up and go to the bathroom in the middle of the night? Asking yourself all of those questions. And then I have 3 blog articles on sleep on the Functional Nutrition Alliance site, but really just thinking about what are the non-negotiables for sleep. A dark room, making a sanctuary, making sure that you have what you need to come into that restful place. So with fatigue, sleep is critical, as is rest. We have to allow ourselves rest, and this is a time in society where we're always pushing. So really thinking through, if I need rest, take rest. My body is telling me something.
Great. Third condition, you've mentioned a couple of times before, but as a form of autoimmune disease, Hashimoto, for example.
Yeah, so again, that three roots, many branches that I developed is my method of looking at autoimmunity, any chronic condition, but particularly autoimmunity. So, in an autoimmune condition, all of those roots have been triggered or activated: your genes, your digestion, and your inflammation. So, we have to consider, where do I start? Can I start with food and think through quality, quantity, diversity, and timing? Can I not start with food? Because that's a triggering topic for me. So I'm going to start with digestion and optimize. But this is where you have to think, wow, there's a lot going on that led to that tipping point where my own immune system is attacking the tissues in my own body, in my own gland. And I have to take a broader, not one thing is going to fix it. This is the problem with autoimmunity. We think once we get the diagnosis, we're going to get the solution. That's not going to happen. So think about where you can nourish your soil. Think about where you start. And again, when it comes to food, if we're focusing there, I say quality, quantity, diversity, and timing. My three principles would be the fat, fiber, protein, eat the rainbow, and know your yes, no, maybe list. And by that, I mean, what foods feel good for you to eat? What foods do not feel good for you to eat in your body? And what are you unsure about? Start there. Create a food mood poop journal. Mood, I'm putting in quotation marks because it means any sign or symptom you're experiencing. And when you show up to your appointments with somebody to help you, you've already shown them that you've done a lot of the work. They're going to be more eager to help you when you've actually shown up and you're doing the work to do the investigation about yourself, as opposed to, hey doc, I heard I should or shouldn't be taking iodine, or should I be taking selenium? Do the work that only you can do. You can be the expert in you. Show up with your expertise. That's going to get you a lot further.
Thank you so much. And the last condition, it's more psychological in nature. So when people are going through depression or anxiety, what should they do? What should they look out for?
Yeah, same. These are all branches on the tree, right? So think about what it is that you need. We know the huge connection between the gut and the brain. So I'm not targeting depression as a symptom. I'm looking at the environment that's leading to that symptom. So I'm thinking, what are your triggers? Where do you get most triggered? When does it feel worse? Is it daily? Are there times in the day? Asking yourself that next level of questions. Instead of saying, I am depressed, continue on that sentence. I am depressed when I am not with around people regularly enough. Okay, what does that mean? What can I do about that? I am depressed when I don't eat breakfast or when I don't nourish myself. Like, where do we go to that next level? And then we're starting to create the support for ourselves, where again, I'm not saying we don't need intervention that is medical or psychiatric in nature. It's just recognizing that there are things we can put in place for ourselves that start to tip the scales a little bit and even support the efficacy of those medical interventions.
Thank you so much. That goes to show how much consistency in your knowledge and what you preach. And I really appreciate that, because across all these different conditions, you are proposing something that is very similar, but at the same time also recognizing the uniqueness of the individuals, the systems, and the different conditions. So thank you, Andrea. And if the audience would love to find out more about yourself, about your work, tremendous work, where can they find you?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. So if you head over to Andrea Nakayama or Andrea Nakayama on all the sites, LinkedIn, Instagram, that will lead you back to the work I do for practitioners or with practitioners at the Functional Nutrition Alliance. We also have a virtual clinic there. On the Andrea Nakayama site, that's where I write for the patient population, really incorporating the realm of narrative medicine with functional medicine and functional nutrition, which recognizes this, the benefits of recognizing our own story and who we are. So AndreaNakayama.com will lead you to all the different places.
Great, great, great. Thank you so much. It has been a very wonderful conversation with you. I've learned a lot, and thank you for reaffirming a lot of what I think already from the science side, and really reaffirming on the clinical side from your end. So thank you.
Thank you. So much fun.